am PLO LUMUMBA here at the Aberdares Country Club and Sanctuary. And indeed, behind me, you can see the giraffes and the zebras, and this is only a tip of the iceberg. This is Garden of Eden in miniature. And we are here to continue our discussions on the continent of Africa. And today, we are discussing an individual and a society that remains very significant in different ways in the continent of Africa: George Soros and the Open Society. George Soros came into the world in the manner that we know him in 1979, and he was a declared philanthrope. And indeed, through the medium of the Open Society, we know that is present in over 120 countries in the world and many countries in the continent of Africa. Their claim to fame, according to their mandate, is that they focus on human rights. They focus on press freedom. They focus on education. They focus on health, and they focus on democracy. And indeed, in Africa, you will remember that the very early interactions of George Soros with the world was offering scholarships to black students. The question is, with all these declared mandate, which on its face you cannot quarrel with, you cannot quarrel with George Soros when he says, "I'm supporting education." And indeed, there are examples of different areas in which education has improved because of the intervention of the Open Society. You cannot quarrel with George Soros when he says that I'm in the human rights space, because human rights are universal and are indeed indivisible. And we are talking about human rights, whether they cover the socio-political rights and the economic and cultural rights, and they are present in that space. You cannot quarrel when you talk about the question of democracy, but we'll have something to say about democracy. And I speak from a position of reasonably good knowledge. I have very good friends in senior positions in the Open Society in the continent of Africa, and I'm familiar with their activities. But be that as it may, there are those who argue, and with certain degrees of justification, that the Soros agenda, its innocence notwithstanding, is one that undermines certain things which are of an African nature. Let us go into the human rights space, for example. In the human rights space, we all proceed from the premise that after Paris in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its categorization in those early days into civil and political, and then of course economic, cultural, and then the question of development, that they were indivisible. But over the years, we have seen, particularly from a Eurocentric and Americocentric perspective, the different permutations of human rights. And one of the areas that has been a source of concern is the LGBTQI. And they say that the alphabet is continuing and nobody knows where it will stop. Be that as it may, Africans have taken the view that human rights that is being propagated without sensitivity to the realities on the ground is one that must be frowned upon. And I know quite a number of countries where the Open Society has come into open conflict with the activities of the Open Society. It is therefore important that the Open Society, particularly in the human rights space, is sensitive to the realities of the continent of Africa. Remember that under the African Charter and human and people's rights, Africa has much as defined the specificities and the particularities and peculiarities of human rights that must be given pride of place. Otherwise, the Open Society is seen as trying to influence and undermine African culture in a negative way. And a number of countries are very sensitive to the activities of Open Society in the sphere of human rights. Be that as it may, they continue their activities. It is also important that in the area of democratization, and remember that the open society gets into the democratic space from a standpoint of what one may call Western democracy, what at one time the Tanzanian president described as the Coca-Colaization of democracy. This idea that there is one-size-fits-all democracy which is conceived in Washington, conceived in London, conceived in Paris, conceived in Brussels, then is handed down to African countries to accept willy-nilly. There are countries that are now beginning to question, why should they tell us what to do in the area of democracy? Why should they tell us that democracy equals to liberalism, that democracy equals to multi-party politics, that democracy equals to abuse and use of press in the manner that is understood in the West, that democracy equals to acceptance of LGBTQ. These are things that are making people very uncomfortable with the activities of open society, particularly because we have seen in a number of countries which under the guise of democracy then fall into anarchy. We have seen countries such as Sudan, which is in anarchy as we speak. We have seen the difficulties that are to be found in South Sudan. We have seen the difficulties that are to be found in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And even in Kenya, despite our relative stability, we have seen that there is problem with electoral processes. And this idea that we as Africans must be dictated to under the guise of education, because those who speak about and against open society and Soros talk about the Sororization of democracy in Africa. And this means that they are coming here with a view to influence processes and to create marionettes and puppets whom they can control in whichever manner that they may. This is contentious, but remember in the year 2017, and this has been denied by George Soros, he was actually accused of being behind the attempted coup d'etat in Equatorial Guinea. Of course, we know that there has been a denial, but that tells you the perception that exists, that in as much as the open society and George Soros by extension appear to be very benign in the activities in which they engage, there are those who take the view that when the things are not going in the direction in which they want, they can use strong arm methods. But we are conscious of the denial, and the jury remains out as to whether or not the accusations are true or not. In the area of medical intervention, it is an area that remains very contentious in the health sector, and one can never argue that Africa continues to suffer, particularly in that area, and we know that the Open Society has been very active in that area. But yet again, even as we talk about that activity, the question is, what impact is being felt on the ground? That is not to take away the fact that the primary role of dealing with health and healthcare is that of African governments through the use of taxes that are paid by the people. Another important area where the George Soros group were very active is the Millennium Villages. We know that it was a consortia of many people that were involved in raising funds for this particular enterprise. But the Millennium Villages were useful. They were based on what was assumed to be identification of the needs of communities in Africa. But I think one of the problems that we have with many Western NGOs, including the Open Society, is the assumption that they have the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom, and that they are able, sitting in whichever offices they are sitting in London or Washington or Paris or whichever part of the world, to conceive solutions for Africa and then to cascade them to their regional officers, which then implement them for the benefit of the people of Africa. I think that the open society also suffers from that particular malaise or malady, and the reason and the effect of that is that despite the best intention of the best of them, sometimes their impact is essentially a storm in a cup of tea. So going forward, what must they do? They must, because we must interact with the world, because we know that philanthropy is a good thing, because they're expending their dollars and their euros and their shillings and their nairas and their cedis in the continent of Africa. But what is important is that they must appreciate and understand that Africans must jointly with them, with friends of goodwill, identify what is in the best needs or what is in the best interest of the continent of Africa. Otherwise, what is thought to be philanthropy, otherwise, what is thought to be good for the continent of Africa, otherwise, what is needed by Africa, will have minimal impact and will be poo-pooed by those who ought to embrace them. So open society, Africa is simply asking you, in whatever you do, be open. When you are in education, be open. Whether you are in health, be open. Whether it's in democracy, be open. Whether it's in press freedom, be open. Whether it is in the medical sector, be open. And when you are open in that way, you'll find an Africa that is willing. But Africa is now getting tired, and rightly so, of groups and institutions which think they are doing well or think that they mean well for Africa, but think that Africans are tails to be wagged. Africa now takes the view that they must take charge of their affairs and work jointly with friends of goodwill. So open society, be open as you engage the continent of Africa. Thank you very much. Our discussions on the continent of Africa are discussions that never end as quickly as we desire, but we take a break and we will come back the next time to continue engaging on the continent of Africa. Thank you very much.
The world is changing, and so is Africa's reality. Political shifts, new partnerships, and economic opportunities. And we're here to uncover why and how it's done. What do the billion-dollar IMF loans have to do with the Kenyan unrest? Are US and French troops actually withdrawing from African states after years of presence? Is Europe's so-called green agenda so green and helpful after all? Why are more and more African countries increasing trade with Russia? And how is Britain lending Africa the treasures London looted? Now, from colonial legacies and security to the future of African democracies, we break down the key challenges ahead and analyze the solutions. While the world is watching Africa, tune in with us and question more with RT International on Maisha TV, Kenya.
Problem number one is leadership in Africa.
What can we do for Africa? That was a wrong question. The right question was, what can we do with Africa?
What Africa do we want?
Africa had to seek first the political kingdom, and the rest would be given unto them. Unfortunately, we sought and obtained the political kingdom, but there is still a debate as to whether the rest has been given unto us.
Half of our people here are below 20 years old. Yes? Look at the average age of our presidents. Is about 63, 64 years old. We're the only continent in the world where we have presidents at 90 years old starting new terms. I mean, you guys are crazy or what?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mushabi Jr. on your screen, bringing to you a program called Maisha Talk. This is where we build your capacity to achieve your dreams and visions. One thing I've learned in life is nobody can ever tell you that you can never be anything or achieve anything in this world. Shut them down. You can achieve anything in this world. And in this program, that is what we are talking about. Principles, attitudes, belief systems, where you are going to gain a lot. You're better off than anybody who's not going to watch this program. This is going to change your life. It's big, it's fun, it's educating, it's entertaining. Right here on Maisha Television, where you choose it, you watch it, and you definitely love it.
This keeps me going on those days when I feel like giving up. Fire.
Do not want the money or properties achieved in a corrupt way.
Badala ya kusaidia watoto wadogo wadogo katika academy za sport, wewe kazi yako imekuwa kila weekend unakuja kwa matanga kutukana viongozi. Wewe ni waziri wa michezo ama waziri wa matanga na masuala za ndani.
Sasa wewe unatuambia nini? This government is going to punish you more than they will punish me.
Tuko na mheshimiwa Eugene, tuko na mheshimiwa Lusaka, na mheshimiwa Wetangula.
I have no problem. I have full confidence in the agencies that we have to do their job. People are out there bandying my brother yesterday. Me, I've said, if he's guilty, aendelee.
Lakini hata nyinyi mkuwe na mshike rada. Sasa nyinyi wakati ya kufanya kazi mnasema tafuta Ruto, lakini siku ya kupiga kura mnaniambia tipping. Sasa nyinyi kweli mko na plani?
We invite you to like Maisha TV Kenya on all our online media platforms. Facebook at Maisha TV Kenya, Twitter at Maisha TV Kenya, Instagram at Maisha TV Kenya. Maisha TV now invites you to send your feedback or complain because we listen to you. You can now reach us on all our media platforms on Maisha TV. Just send your messages to our social media platforms, call or text us on 0746 999 841 or send us an email to info@maishatv.co.ke. We care. We shall respond to your feedback or complaints within 14 days. Also, keep a copy of messages sent to us. We listen to you. Because you listen and you watch us. Maisha TV. Choose it, watch it, and love it.
I am Pierre LUMUMBA here at the Aberdares Country Club and Sanctuary in Nyeri County in Kenya in the continent of Africa. And as we continue to look at the continent, the question of trade, which is the lifeblood of human activity, must be given its pride of place. And throughout the ages, one cannot talk about trade without talking about seaports. If you go into history, you will discover that it is trade through the seaports that has kept human activity at the level in which it has been throughout the ages. Even with the advent of railways, with the advent of air transport, transport by sea remains the mother transport. Civilizations transacted and interacted because of the seaports, and the continent of Africa somehow remains the epicenter. Even if you look at the maps which were done by the European cartographers and which makes Africa small, yet we know it is big. It is at the very center of the world, if you may. And throughout trade, whatever kind of trade, there were major ports in the continent of Africa. Of course, over the ages, ports have acquired different characters as different minerals became and gained prominence. But let us look at some of the great ports from history. In the eastern part of Africa, we remember Zanzibar. Zanzibar was and remains a port that was the epicenter of trade between Africa and the Arab world. Of course, the kind of trade that was being undertaken at that time was as dehumanizing as it was humiliating. It was slave trade. The port of Bagamoyo was also a port that acquired prominence in Tanzania during that particular time, as indeed the port of Dar es Salaam and the ports of Tanga and the ports of Mtwara. If we continue looking at that particular eastern part, sometimes referred to as the Eastern Indian Ocean. As you move down, you went into Mozambique and you find the Beira port, which is also very significant for purposes of trade in that area, as indeed the port of Durban, which has retained its significance throughout the ages, and of course in Malagasy, in what is now Madagascar, and in Mauritius and in the Seychelles. These were very important ports and remain important ports. In the recent past, Djibouti has acquired prominence which is unrivaled, essentially because every other military in the world, it has been called the parking lot of the military bases. The Americans are there, the Chinese are there, the Japanese are there, the British are there. And that is not to say that we are forgetting the port of Kismayu. And Somalia has the longest coastline in the continent of Africa. Kismayu has gained importance, as indeed one of the deepest ports and the best ports is the port of Babra. And how can we forget Mombasa in Kenya because of its deepness, and Lamu, which is acquiring prominence. All these ports tells you that Africa had almost every other port. You go to Massawa in Eritrea or Asaba in Eritrea is as important as the other ports. And as you move into the Red Sea, you begin to go into Egypt and get Port Said was an important port throughout the ages, and even the days of the Suez Canal retained its significance. And as you move down, Port Sudan is also an equally important port. And as you move down in Tunisia, you find a big port there. And you move down to Morocco, you find Casablanca and Agadir, which were very important ports, particularly for Mediterranean trade, as indeed you find in Libya. So that Africa is dotted by very significant ports for purposes of trade. And if you go to the southern or to the western part of Africa, it must be remembered that early trade, for example, when you talk about the trade that took place between Spain and Portugal. It was in Gambia, particularly as you see the river Gambia getting into the Atlantic Ocean, you find very significant ports. And in Dakar, in Senegal, you find critical ports, as indeed you find them in Sierra Leone. Freetown becomes a very important port in that area. And in Equatorial Guinea, we never talk about the port of Bata, which is in Equatorial Guinea. That is also a very important port there. And of course, Port Harcourt, named as it is Port Harcourt, because it was a significant port in the Delta region in that part of the world. And as you go down, you go to Angola with the discovery of oil by ExxonMobil. Angola, Luanda became very important as an important port, as indeed, as you go to Namibia, you find the places such as Swakopmund, which are right on the Atlantic, and Cape Coast. Cape Coast really remain, in fact, if you use the local languages, the Cape of Good Hope. When Vasco da Gama got into the Cape of Good Hope, that is when things began to shine on his way to India. So when we talk about the ports of Africa, they are very critical. And one cannot talk about the ports of Africa without talking about the trade and how they were established. When the colonialists came, most of the railway lines were designed to get you to these ports. And that is how they grew in prominence. And even today, when we talk about the major corridors, I want to talk about some of the major developments. If you look at the Lobito corridor, which we are now talking about, which is meant to link Lusaka, or rather to link Zambia, which is landlocked, and to link the Democratic Republic of Congo down to Angola. It is because these ports are natural ports. And when you look at Durban, when you on the eastern side in South Africa, gold mining became very significant, as was diamond. Beira is so important both for Malawi and Zambia. And many forget in the 1970s, one of the major infrastructural developments in Africa was initiated by the then presidents of Tanzania, Kambarage Nyerere and Kenneth David Kaunda, when they did the railway that is called Tazara, the Tanzania-Zambia Railway, which takes you from New Kapirimposhi in Zambia through to Dar es Salaam. And these really did give prominence to the port of Dar es Salaam. And outside of that, we also know that right now there are great efforts. People are talking about building a railway line right from Nigeria up to Algiers and Morocco, and all this because of trade. And when we talk about the significance of these ports, it is important to now begin to look at them in the contemporary economic arena, because ports are becoming so important because sea trade has become particularly significant in terms of coasting. And right now, the Suez Canal, which, as you know, had its great significance in those early days, is in trouble because of the war in the Middle East. We have seen the cost of insurance skyrocketing. We have seen the cost of goods skyrocketing because of the activities of organizations such as the Houthis in Yemen and in the Gulf, in that particular area, in the Persian Gulf, and of course in the Red Sea region. So African ports are beginning to acquire greater significance, because you are saying, the Europeans are now saying it may be a little longer, but you are safer going through Dakar, you are safer going through Sierra Leone, you are safer going through Nigeria, through Ghana, through to Bata, through to Cape Town, through to Durban, through to Beira, through to Mombasa, and then you go inland. That is how these ports are acquiring great significance. And there have been recent development also that have given certain ports, which we never knew about. The discovery of natural gas has suddenly given the port of Mtwara in Tanzania significance that it never had. And we now know that Mtwara and Bagamoyo are under development. We also know that the port of Lamu in Mombasa is becoming very significant, and is becoming significant because when you are talking about the linkage between Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, and southern Ethiopia, Lamu is becoming very important, as indeed the port of Berbera in Somaliland. And those of you who know what is happening now, there is a big road that is coming all the way from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia to the port of Berbera. Ethiopia is also trying, without success, to ensure that it has access, without success so far, the ports of Massawa and Asaba in Eritrea. The net effect of all these, and this is to me, when we talk about ports, we also must talk about, if Africa wants to move her goods, if Africa wants to talk about Africa Continental Free Trade Area, if Africa wants to ensure that we trade with the rest of the world, we trade with China, we trade with Australia, we trade with the United States of America, we trade with countries such as China, we have gas from Russia, we have Central Asia people trading with us. It is sea trade that is going to ensure that this is done. And that is why I think that many countries in Africa are now getting into arrangements with some of these traditional friends. And when I talk about traditional friends for most African countries, they were the non-colonizers. And China, whatever you say about them, Russia, whatever you say about them, Turkey, whatever you say about them, are becoming increasingly important in the development of these ports, as indeed are the Emiratis, are becoming very important, because trade somehow always rides on water. It is the water that carries most trade, and the more we develop our ports, the safer we are and the richer we will become, and Africa should focus on that particular space if we are to achieve what we deserve to achieve. And it's not lost on me that my own focus in study actually is the law of the sea. And I speak to it with great passion because I'm a good student of it. Thank you very much.